Star Wars was full of proud civilizations that were independent from galactic society to some degree or another. These ranged from relatively small, semi-independent systems like Dathomir to much larger swaths of territory, such as Hutt Space. One of the more lesser-known independent civilizations was the Hapes Consortium, a sector which, despite being located fairly close to major hyperroots and the heart of the core worlds, maintained a fierce independence from the Republic and Empire alike. Considered an allied region by both governments, the Hapes Consortium was a rigidly matriarchal society that maintained a closed border policy with the outside galaxy, and in this video, we'll be providing an in-depth look at its history and culture.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The story of the Hapes Consortium begins with the Lorell Raiders, a notorious and highly organized group of pirates that plagued the Inner Rim throughout the post-Mandarin period. Originating from Laurel and the Trellin trade routes, these pirates struck shipping vessels and passenger ships alike, and they were notorious for kidnapping women from the ships they raided. They hid their captives on their most well-guarded stronghold, the planet Hapes, a world hidden deep in a tangle of nebulae off the Polemian trade routes. These nebulae walled off an entire star cluster from the outside galaxy, making hyperspace travel impossible in all but a few spots. The whole cluster was a natural fortress, and the Lorell Raiders made extensive use of it. Over the centuries, the Raiders' captives on Hapes steadily became their own distinct people. Due to a limited genetic pool, the Hapans also rapidly adapted to their new homeworld. Due to the sheer density of stars in the cluster and its 7 moons, Hapes never saw true light, and as a result, the Hapans quickly lost their night vision, a minor quirk that nonetheless set them apart from baseline humans. Generations of women lived and died on Hapes without ever leaving the planet. Their sons were typically taken by pirates and trained to join the Raiders. Then, in 4030 BBY, the Jedi Knights came knocking. After many years of battling the Lorell Raiders, the Republic had finally figured out the hyperspace routes to Hapes, and the Jedi amassed a task force to cleanse the Inner Rim of its pirate scourge. They completely annihilated the Lorell Raiders, and when all was said and done, the Jedi convinced the Republic to leave Hapes and the surrounding Hapes cluster to the Raiders' now freed captives, who quickly built a civilization of their own. After the defeats of the Lorell Raiders, the surviving Hapan population were mostly women, and they were all determined to never again be ruled by men. They established a hereditary monarchy, the Hapes Consortium, led by a queen mother, and from Hapes they rapidly spread out across the cluster they called home. After roughly a millennia of expansion and independent development, during which they settled 63 worlds in the cluster and were recognized as an allied region by the Republic, the Hapans closed themselves off from the galaxy in 3100 BBY, barring travelers from entering the Hapes cluster, with only a few rare exceptions. Very little is known of Hapan history during the cluster's 3 millennia period of isolation, so we're going to pause here and discuss the astrography of the Hapes cluster itself. Large parts of the Hapes cluster were inaccessible due to the presence of transitory mists, great nebulae of dust and gas that produced the cluster's many stars. There were believed to be as many as 190 potentially habitable worlds among those stars, though the Hapans only settled 63 systems, most of them close to the cluster's heart. There were only 2 routes through the outer nebulae, which divided the cluster from the rest of the galaxy: the Hapan Spine, which led out to Tanab on the Polemian Run, and the more obscure Lorell routes, which led out to Lorell. The Hapan Spine was by far the most widely used route, so we'll start our tour of the cluster there. Along the Hapan Spine was Rokwo Depot, which was a sort of border crossing point for the Hapes cluster. Beyond lay the Hapan Rim worlds, a corridor of systems that was cut off from the cluster's heart by a thick tendril of the transitory mists, which inhibited communication between Hapes and these colonies. As a result, the Rim worlds were considered backwaters, connected to the rest of Hapan civilization only by the Great Rim Route. Planets in this region included Orelon, Rainbow, Rinmar, Zalori, Terraphon, Shedu, Mard, Rebome, Drenna, Kalfa 5, and Kafari. Of these, the only notable worlds were Terraphon, the backwater homeworld of a clan of Hapan royal guards, and Shedu Mard, which was the temporary home of the New Jedi Order at one point. Just beyond the Rim worlds was a small region called the Corsair Outback, which contained the Joraka, Stalsenek, and Nantaka systems. The Lorell route emptied out in a pocket of the cluster known as the Lorell Reach, home to Ket, Daruvia, Senix, Andalia, Chospa, and Telka Station, the latter of which was located in a region known as the Knotholes. Both the Lorell route and the Great Rim route led into the Rifle Worlds, the Hapes Cluster's industrial and commercial heart, which were named after an attempt at secession they made early in the Consortium's history. The Rifle Worlds included Lavola, Meres, Virgil, and Modus along the Lorell route, Devora, Woden, Algnadesh, and Relifon along the Great Rim routes, and Charuba and Charuba along the Galanor Reach, which led into the heart of the cluster. Adjacent to the Rifle Worlds were the Gate Worlds, which were Sargon, Fabrini, Zadaria, and Felope, all along the Rinmar Trail, which led to Hapes. The heart of the Hapes cluster was appropriately called the Inferior region, and it was home to roughly 24 of the cluster's most prestigious worlds. These were Tal Shiraim, Savoia, Farnica, Novi, Galanor, Baldavia, Thessalon, Milenar, Lamayash, Arches, Selab, Javaria, Lemimi, Thracia, Hatera Ut, Rebella, Tirata, Tumani, Ediorung, Kalania, Arabanth, and, of course, Hapes itself. Hapes was by far the most important world of any of these, but it was nonetheless mostly unspoiled, with its population of only 100 million, all living in a select few cities. The Hapans were sticklers for protecting what they considered beautiful, and so they took special care to preserve Hapes' environment. As a result, Hapes was renowned for its natural beauty, especially at night, when its sky lit up with the light of 7 moons, the bright tendrils of the transitory mists, and the countless stars of the Hapes cluster. Unfortunately, the beauty of Hapes and the surrounding cluster was somewhat tainted by the Hapes Consortium's absolutely merciless political climate. The Consortium featured high economic inequality, and members of higher social and economic classes tended to look down on those lower in the totem pole than themselves, often seeing their lower standing as a moral failing or an expression of some inherent inferiority. The Consortium was also a pure aristocracy, with all the corruption and intrigue at the top that entails. Assassination was the primary method of social advancement for members of the Hapan ruling class, and the Queen Mothers were known to arrange for the deaths of cousins, and sometimes even their own children. As we mentioned earlier, Hapes was also a strict matriarchy. The Hapans had started out just being unwilling to ever again be ruled by men, but they eventually came to believe that men were outright biologically inferior, incapable of being as intelligent as women. The Hapans used this notion as the basis for making all males second-class citizens within the Hapes Consortium, to the point where many male Hapans joined pirate gangs or smuggled themselves out of the sector to escape it. There were examples of men, usually from the royal family, who were afforded minor positions of power, such as Prince Isildur, who we'll talk about later, but these were few and far between, and they were usually supervised by higher-ranking women. Rampant inequality aside, the Hapans also had some pretty cool starships, which the Hapan Royal Navy used to defend the cluster's borders. Due to millennia spent isolated from the galaxy, the Hapan's technology was inferior to the Republic/Imperial standard in some ways, and superior in others. Their turbo lasers, for instance, were inaccurate and required long cooldown times after each shot, while their ion cannons were better than any equivalent the Empire ever developed. The cluster's warships and starfighters were primarily produced by Olanji/Charuba, and only a few are known by name. In the Imperial era, the Hapan's primary space superiority fighter was the Mittil Starfighter, a unique craft that vaguely resembled the Sith fighters employed by Revan's Sith Empire. Designed with help from separatist shipwrights that sought refuge in the sector after the Clone Wars, these craft were fast as hell, featured onboard astromechs, and were armed with 2 laser cannons and a concussion missile launcher. They were primarily carried aboard Nova-class battle cruisers, which sort of resemble Klingon birds of prey and were the backbone of the Royal Navy. At 400 meters long, these ships required crews of nearly 2,000 each, and they sported 25 turbo laser batteries, 10 ion cannons, 10 heavy point defense laser cannons, and hangars with room for 30 starfighters. The symbols of the Hapan fleet, however, were the iconic Hapan battle dragons. These ships kind of look like classic Cylon base stars, but there's really nothing like these double-saucered battleships which Imperial commanders rightly feared. The 2 saucer-like main sections of the Hapan battle dragons were connected by narrow pylons and ringed with weaponry. These guys were nearly twice the size of Nova-class battlecruisers, but they actually required several hundred fewer crew. At the same time, they could carry 36 starfighters and a complement of up to 500 ground troops, and they were armed with 40 turbolaser batteries, 40 ion cannons, a pair of triple ion cannons, 10 proton torpedo launchers, a tractor beam projector, and 16 pulse mass generators, which essentially fired hyperspace interdiction mines. But what made the design of the Hapan battle dragon so ingenious was how it accounted for the weaknesses of its turbolasers. In battle, Hapan battle dragons constantly rotated, much like the aforementioned Cylon base stars, which allowed fresh turbolasers to be brought to bear, while recently used ones were allowed to cool. These ships rarely saw full-scale battles, however, due to the Hapes Consortium's isolation. As we mentioned earlier, Hapes remained cut off from the greater galaxy for 3,000 years of Republic history, and it maintained that isolation through the Imperial era. If you're surprised that the Empire allowed the Hapes Cluster to maintain its independence, you're not alone. It was a mystery to most of the galaxy as well. There were a few minor clashes between Hapan forces and Imperial fleets, but these were usually staged by Emperor Palpatine, who used the Hapans to kill off high-ranking commanders who displeased him. By and large, Hapes and the Empire were on surprisingly good terms for no apparent reason, leading many to speculate that the Emperor was sleeping with the Hapan Queen Mother or some other aristocrat. These allegations were totally unproven, it should be noted, but it's a spicy bit of trivia nonetheless. The Hapans didn't open up to the greater galaxy until 8 ABY, when, with no warning, they reached out to the New Republic, which had taken Coruscant from the Empire the year before. The reason? Crown Prince Isildur wanted to marry Princess Leia, and his mother, the Queen Mother, hoped such a marriage would considerably increase Hapes' political influence. This situation was a whole confusing knot of sketchy politics. If you want the whole story, read The Courtship of Princess Leia, the 1994 Legends novel that this story comes from, which first introduced the Hapans. To make a long story short though, Leia eventually decided to marry Han Solo instead, and Isildur ended up marrying a witch from Dathomir, which was annexed by the Hapes Consortium due to the cultural compatibility of the 2 matriarchal societies. Leia and Isildur remained on friendly terms though, and so the Hapes Cluster ended up opening up to the New Republic anyway. The Hapans were pretty heavily involved with the Yuuzhan Vong War and the events of the later post-Endor years, but that's a story in itself, so we're going to wrap things up here. Are there any other obscure Star Wars civilizations you'd like us to look at? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.